Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and teach you how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour to be a part of the program. It is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. It's 1-855-450-6624, or you can send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya, delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Let's see here. Tony from Toronto kicks us off this hour. Hey, Tony, welcome into the Ask Noah show.
Hey, Noah. Just calling, wanted to know your advice. I got a customer of mine that is making a website currently and planning on storing sensitive information there, medical records to be specific. And they have somebody else building the website, not me, but they asked me for my advice and how I would deploy this. And one of the things I was advising them is to encrypt their tables. Now, I don't have too much experience with that, and I kind of wanted to see what you thought. I was planning on, I looked up the MariaDB documentation, and I've been reading about encryption at rest. I'm assuming that they're using HTTPS, so that the transit should be fine. But what would you recommend? And would you recommend spinning it up on something like DigitalOcean over? Because the customer is they're scared about their privacy, so they're wondering them hosting it themselves in their office, on their own internet connection versus maybe something like AWS or DigitalOcean. I think the AWS or DigitalOcean would be better for performance, for geo-redundancy, for all that. But anyways, I wanted to get your take on both of those things. Okay,
so let's a couple things to break down there. So the first things first. If you can arrange it, anytime you're dealing with sensitive information and public-facing information, you want to separate those out as much as you can. Now, oftentimes, as probably is in the case in your client, the sensitive information, certain aspects of that have to be transmitted to the public-facing information. So, for example, patient comes in, wants a copy of their medical records, you want to provide them an opportunity to log in and download that. And so the way that we have always kind of set that up is the data, the EMR, would reside on server A, and the public-facing, what we call a patient portal anyway, when we set it up, resides on server B. And so that way, if let's say the actual EMR is emr.myclinic.com, and the public-facing server is mypatientportal.com. I'm just making these up, right? They don't exist. But if an attacker were to come to mypatientportal.com, they would have to not only compromise the mypatientportal.com, they would also have to compromise the second portal or the second server. And so in that way, you have a little bit, you put a little bit more distance between you and the attacker. So that's thing one. Now that can't always be accomplished, right? There are times where that's just not functional, or the software doesn't support it, or whatever. So then you start looking at encryption, which you're absolutely right to go through to. And yes, MariaDB does support encryption. What's encrypted with MariaDB? The table spaces, the individual tables, and essentially the log files. And if I remember right, and I'm kind of working out the back of my memory here, I think you have to go in and enable that separately, and I would. Here's the issue with encryption on running servers. Encryption for data at rest makes a lot of sense because if an attacker ever steals the hard drive, they can't access the information. The problem with using encryption on a running server is obviously for legitimate requests, the server has to be able to decrypt that information. Therefore, the key has to be available to the server to decrypt the information. And so it's kind of like, not exactly like, but kind of like when people talk about encrypting ZFS or FreeNAS shares, right? You can do it, and it does offer some mitigated protection, but the problem is at the end of the day, if the server is up and running and those keys are loaded into memory so that the server can do its job, you're not really thwarting anything if somebody gets access to the server, because if they can steal the data, they could steal the keys, because both have to reside on the server. And the only way to prevent that would be to store the key outside of the server, and then every request, the key would have to be provided, and if it was secured with a passphrase, unlocked, which is totally impractical and defeats the purpose of having a server. So I agree with your methodology of saying, hey, let's encrypt the data wherever possible. You should do that. Just understand what the limits of those encryption, what the limits of that disk encryption is, and what it's going to do for you. More importantly, what it's not going to do for you. If somebody's able to get into the server, all the encryption in the world isn't going to help you if those keys are loaded into memory. Does that kind of make sense?
It absolutely does. Yeah. No, that's good.
Most EMR software, so we use OpenEMR, for example. Most EMR software is specifically designed with security in mind, from the standpoint of they know that in 2019 patients want access to their medical records. They know that in 2019 people expect to be able to download those things on a smart device or from their home computer. So to a certain degree, you're swimming downstream. You're swimming with the rest of the folks that are interested in doing this, and everybody is kind of focused on this. So there's no harm in doing it. I wouldn't suggest you don't do it. You would want, the things I would tell a client if we sat down and had this conversation, I would tell them, first of all, you make sure that we stay on top of updates, patches and updates. Second of all, we make sure that we have very good physical security, which we'll get to in a second. And then third of all, you make sure that you have a qualified security professional like yourself to go through and actually set this stuff up for the client, because if they're trying to do it themselves, or the worst case scenario, if they're hiring various different contractors for various different things and you got a bunch of hands in the fire. And I won't go into details, but I will tell you that Altispeed Technologies just about a year ago was involved with a company we were doing contract work with, and a couple other companies were doing contract work with it as well. And one of our techs said, hey, we see something kind of funny going on in the router logs here. And we dug into it, and sure enough, somebody was messing around. And what had ended up happening was, because they had to facilitate so many different companies accessing their network, they started opening stuff up right and left to make it so that they didn't have to approve all of these requests, and they did away with key files, and we went to simple passwords, all sorts. It was a whole chain of failures. And we were able to go to them and say, hey, listen, you have some major, major problems. And so what you need to do is put one person, it doesn't have to be us, but put one person at the front of the horse and carriage, and then let everybody else come through those doors. If you don't have time to maintain your security, so be it. Hire somebody to do it. We're offering, here's why. And they were receptive to that. And they said, yeah, by all means, go for it. We don't need a data breach. And so, I like to say we earn business that way. As to your question as to where to host, this is where encryption does matter, right? Because what you're trying to prevent with disk encryption is where somebody has physical access to the machine and they go to physically remove a drive and they want to steal data, it's going to be encrypted. So in the case of, can you store on DigitalOcean? First of all, DigitalOcean has very, very good physical security. In fact, I remember seeing a video that they did of their data center, and they walked through some of their security protocols, and I'm sure not all of them were in the video, but I was pretty impressed with their ability to control physical access to their data center. So I would say you're pretty safe there. Obviously, AWS is a safe bet, at least from a public standpoint, right? There's all sorts of different stuff that we get into. We start talking about privacy, NSA, all that crap. But for just a business decision, AWS is not a bad way to go. Disk encryption is going to help you there, because if, for example, somebody tried to clone your virtual disk drive, let's say there was some sort of security vulnerability that allowed a person to copy either a data center tech or whoever it is copies the hard disk image. Unless they get that machine actually running and are able to capture those keys, all of that data is then secure. Let's say, and this is a far more practical example, one of DigitalOcean servers crashes. Physical host crashes, and for whatever reason, their protocols aren't followed and those drives aren't destroyed properly like they should be. Again, you and your client's data are safe because it's encrypted. It's in a locked box. And if they have 50 million years and the entire computing power of the entire world, maybe they would be able to break into it. But as long as you're choosing a strong passphrase, something like 64 characters, you're not going to have to deal with that. And so disk encryption is going to help you there. We have clinics that are hosted on DigitalOcean. We have clinics that are hosted on, I don't think we have any on AWS, but we certainly have clinics that are on DigitalOcean. We've done in-house hosting, and we have done co-location, where we actually rent space in a data center and put our server in and then lease VMs out to clinics to run their EMR. Okay.
All right. Well, that definitely helps. And is it all right if I ask one more thing?
Yeah, you bet.
What would be the best resource that you would say for learning? I'm trying to learn more how the internet works and how different companies connect between each other. I know they use BGP, but that's pretty much the extent of where what I know. But is there a book or a resource that I can use to learn more about that and how the internet works?
I don't have a specific book or resource for you, but here's what I will tell you. The internet is nothing more than a very large network. And so if you want to start to learn the underpinnings of the internet, you can do it inside of your own house. One of the reasons that I have recommended Microtech routers, not only on this show, but to all of my clients, is because the cost of entry is super low. $40 or less, you can buy a router on Amazon.com. And this is a router that is actually, in fact, used by many ISPs to route traffic. So you're using the same operating system, the same tools that major ISPs are using to do their traffic shaping, right? And if you wanted to go all the way, you could buy Cisco gear, and now you're using the exact same equipment that ISPs are using. And you can set these routers up in your house, and you can assign one router as 1.1.1.1, and you can assign another router as 2.2.2.2, and you've effectively created a small version of the internet. You have two individual networks that have two separate IP addresses that are not routable to each other, and, I mean, depending on what you set as a subnet mask, but let's just say for the sake of argument that you assign a single IP to each one of these routers, and you can start building and testing and understanding how things work. If I have the 1.1.1.1 network over here, and now I plug another consumer-grade Linksys router right into the LAN port, it's going to pull the public IP of 1.1.1.1 or whatever the DHCP pool for that network is, and you'll be able to see how does traffic route and what rules do I have to create to get traffic to talk to one another. So if I know, if I have a DNS entry of, for example, 2.2.2.2, and I have the route set in there, it's going to work. That's about a 30-second thing to set up. And understanding network at that level is, in my opinion, is really beneficial to understanding how the internet works, because the internet, again, is just a collection of smaller networks. And the problem with trying to understand that on the actual internet is you run into all sorts of artificial limitations, right? So, for example, one of the things that I walk technicians through when they come with me, our employment process is something like they come in, they go through a basic training thing, they go out with one of the technicians and kind of follow them around, and then I follow that technician around for about 2 weeks before he or she is allowed to go take on their own clients. And one of the things that I spend time doing with them is troubleshooting networks in what we call the sandbox, which is essentially our staged version of what I'm describing you to set up. And the advantage there is every concept that works on a local network will work on the internet, right? All of those concepts are there, but we have artificial limitations in place. So, for example, certain ISPs will block certain ports or traffic to certain certain items. You'll also figure out that when you start going across subnets, things like broadcast traffic is dropped. And so, what does that mean? Well, it means that if you're going across a subnet, DHCP isn't going to work, and printer discovery isn't going to work. And so, there's all sorts of things like that you're able to ascertain by plugging a printer into one router and seeing if you can see it from the other. And that's something that's difficult to do on the internet because there are so many, on the real internet, because there are so many variables. But the principles are accurate, right? And so just because Comcast, for example, blocks torrent traffic doesn't mean the internet doesn't support torrent traffic. It just means that Comcast blocks torrent traffic. And the same as, I think there was a deal with our local ISP where they started dropping the discovery protocol for the HP printers because people were plugging those things right into the internet and they were getting live on the internet and bad things were happening. So that's where I recommend starting. And if you want to go further than that, if you're looking for something structured, I'd recommend something like the CCENT course. Cisco did something very interesting the past couple of years. They used to have what was called the CCNA, and it was a very respectable certification. And what they did was they determined that two things were a problem. First of all, the test was too difficult for most entry-level network technicians, and the test was too easy for anybody that was doing anything serious with small to medium-sized networks. And so they did a very wise thing, in my opinion. They split the test up, and they have CCNA parts 1 and 2. And if you combine the CCNA parts 1 and 2, you have what used to be the old CCNA certification, except it's much, much harder. And now it focuses on heavily on IPv6. And they created an entirely new course an entirely new certification called the CCENT, Entry Level Network Technician. And the CCENT is what will teach you the very basics of building a network from the ground up. And of course, like I say, all of those concepts will translate to the internet. And so what you start with is square one. In fact, the only real benefit to the CCENT class from a employer perspective is subnetting. And subnetting is, of course, that the subnet mask underneath or the slash that we put that basically defines which IP addresses relate to hosts and which IP addresses are outside the range of our network and need to be forwarded on somewhere else. And that's what that subnet mask tells us. And so being able to calculate and determine what subnet mask to use and how many IP addresses you want and what the advantage is. I mean, why don't we just put everything on one gigantic Class A subnet? You'll figure those things out as you kind of step through those. And there used to be, I'm not sure if these exist anymore. I'll try and look into this for you, Tony, and see if I can post something in the show notes, and no promises that I'll be able to find it. But there used to be labs that you could rent, Cisco labs. And so instead of having to purchase the routers yourself, you could spend like $35, and for a week you would SSH into this controller, and you'd have access to like 25 routers and 15 switches, and it was a lab rack, and you could get access to that, and you could do all sorts of experimentation and really hone your skills, testing on equipment that nobody cared if you broke, and there was no penalty for screwing around with it, because that was the idea. And so I'm a very hands-on learner, and so I tend to recommend hands-on approaches to learning, but that would be my recommendation.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, Noah. I appreciate the call.
Yeah, appreciate having you. 855-450-NOAH. It's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. You're on Ask Noah. Good evening. Thanks for hanging in there.
Good evening. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm okay. I was actually looking forward. I've been thinking since Saturday. I'm like, all right, I got to make sure Tuesday I got to work at 7. I got to make sure I make it in time, so I'm glad I made it.
You're a good person. You made it.
I did. So first things first, I love the podcast. And whenever I'm at work, I listen to it while I'm on the computer. I had 2 questions for you. I tried to cut out like random questions I don't need to ask you, but 2 main ones. I used to use ParrotSec OS. I'm not sure if you've heard of ParrotSec.
Mm-mm.
So basically, it's like Kali Linux, but it can be used as a regular desktop for like regular use as well.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's not bad. So I had installed a couple months ago a couple issues, but I was able to resolve it for installing. I'm trying to install it now because I had an issue. I'm like, all right, let me just blow out the whole thing. I have a tendency of blowing out the hard drive, then starting from scratch again. So I blew it out, tried to install it, went through the installer. The last step was to install Grub, and once that had installed, it rebooted the computer. I unplugged the flash drive. The only concern is I'm using a ThinkPad T420, and I tried doing this on a T440, but basically when it booted back up, it would show me the boot device options, and it wouldn't just boot into the OS, even if I select each of the 3 options that were given to me. So I'm thinking maybe it's a Grub issue.
Yes.
Now, I've seen a couple posts online, and the thing is, so when I go to ParrotSec, their wiki isn't the best. Like it says, soon coming, and it's not really helpful because they've been out for a while now. So they had one way, that was LVM. I should probably mention this earlier, but I'm using LVM with Lux encryption.
Yep.
Now, the only thing, though, is from what they show, that's not for the Lux. So there's a couple other steps I have to do. Once I mount the partitions, once I do open Lux and mount it to the mount drive and then like dev, and then sys, and something. There's another partition as well that I mount. The only issue is when I try to do grub install, it says that user bin cannot be found. So I was hoping that you may know what the issue could be. I tried using Reddit and a couple other sites as well to figure out why it says that user bin isn't there, and that's why I can't use grub install.
Did you use when you were setting up Lux? Did you do it by hand, or was it an option in the installer?
So first I did it where I didn't do the full customization myself. I already made a couple of partitions, and then I had this edited. The only thing I edited was I had added a swap partition to it, and I had all the partitions. I had the home partition separated from the rest of the, like the root and the other directories and stuff like that. So that was the only thing that I did. That didn't work. So I tried I'm trying to stick with LVM and Lux encryption just because I always carry my laptop. I'm always worried if I lose it, I don't want people to have access to the hard drive.
You should be.
So I tried doing that, and it didn't necessarily. So that didn't work. And I tried doing it where it had still LVM and Lux, but I had basically set it up where it would do everything itself. It said, you sure don't want to add swap? I skipped that part. I'm like, all right, let me just try to have it handle all itself, everything on one partition. So I have home, root, everything like that, boot. Not on one partition, but on I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to word it. But so basically, I tried to have the installer handle that by itself without me editing any of the partitions that were there. That also didn't work, and I literally installed it like 15 times in one night. I'm trying to figure out like what the issue was.
Well, okay, all right. Well, let's start with this. So here's what I would do, because you've got a lot of stuff going on, my friend. So here's what I would start. So to start, the first thing we want to do is understand what the process is. So when the BIOS or UEFI interface loads, the first thing it does, it looks for something bootable. Obviously, that can't be encrypted by nature. So you have a /boot, and that isn't encrypted. Now, we know that's working because you're getting to a grub screen, yes?
No, not at all.
Okay, so that's the first thing.
Okay,
so that's the first thing we have to troubleshoot. If you're not getting if grub itself isn't even loading, then that limits severe. So we're not even 2 Lux yet, because if you've encrypted your boot partition, there's 0% chance you're going to get the machine to boot. You can't encrypt the boot partition because the BIOS has no idea how to decrypt it. So that's step 1 to fix. We've got to figure that out. And maybe that fixes your issue altogether. On the off chance it doesn't, I'll walk you through the rest of the process. So first, we check and make sure that the BIOS can access the boot partition. It's not encrypted, and that part is working. Once you've verified that is working, we troubleshoot that part. Now we should get to a grub screen. We get to a grub screen. The next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we can actually decrypt the device. And so, like you said, crypt setup, space Lux open, and then /dev/SDA, whatever it is. And that will unlock or decrypt the drive. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to mount the LVM volume, so sudo lv scan, and that will give us a list of all of the volume groups that are there. And then you'll take the associated volume group, sudo mounts, and /dev/whatever vg, blah, 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 and then the mount point. So you'll get that done. After you have that, after we've decrypted, we've mounted the drive, now you can do something like grub-install, and that will go through and we can start to try to fix or repair grub if it's not booting on its own. But if you're not even getting to the grub prompt, then you have a bigger problem. Then you're not even dealing with encryption at that point. You're dealing with a problem with your bootloader. The other thing you could do as a stopgap measure, if you get to a point where it's just not working and you just need a working solution, so that what I just defined, that's the right way to go about troubleshooting. The incorrect way to go about troubleshooting, but will probably save you a bunch of time, just make a small partition and install a more well-known operating system like Ubuntu or whatever, and let that operating system handle taking care of installing grub and stuff like that, and you'll have a tiny little partition. I hesitate to say that on the air because there's going to be some people slapping their foreheads going, that's not an answer, and it's not. It's really not an answer. However, it's one of those things that it will work, right? As long as you have, even if all you've done is set up the Lux correctly on the installation you actually want to use, if you had a small little utility partition and it booted a well-known operating system where they are doing testing and they have all sorts of automated scripts and stuff to handle detecting Lux and setting all that all up, that will probably simplify your life tremendously. So I might give that a shot too, if you run out of all the other proper troubleshooting methods.
Okay.
Cool.
That actually sounds like a pretty good idea. I actually didn't think about that. I had one more question.
Yeah.
If you have the time. I know
I do.
Probably somebody else in the line.
No, go for it.
So I am trying to get into the network field, the cybersecurity field. I'm trying to, Mr. Robot kind of changed the game for me, so I'm trying to be more in the cybersecurity field. So I have a Cisco firewall. I have, I think it's Netgear and Netgate. It's for PFSense.
Yeah,
so
Netgate.
I have all these devices that I want to be able to set up.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it was, Netgate. So I do want to set this up into my home network, and I was planning on doing that, but we ended up switching companies. Before I had Optimum. Now I have Altice, which is like, I guess, like a derivative of Optimum.
Okay.
So, or like, like a smaller company of Optimum.
Yeah, gotcha.
The only issue is that it's a 3-in-1 box. I have the cable box, the modem, and a router all in one. I wanted to know, would it be possible to even attach all these things to, because I also have like an access point as well that I kind of want to set up.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to my dad who's in the field. He was saying that may be an issue because, I was hoping that if it was separated where I have a modem and a router, I could just unplug the router, plug my own, have the firewall set up, then have the access point set up and do all that. Now, would that be a challenge? Should I just give up on trying to do that?
No.
For what I have?
No, you should not give up. What you should do is inside of you're right, that combination device is a route. It's a modem, it's a router, it's a switch usually, and it's also an access point. So there's actually 4 devices inside of what everybody calls the router or the modem. And just like when we refer to a spork, is it a good spoon? Not really. Is it a good fork? Not particularly, but hey, it's a fork and a spoon all in one, right? Mm-hmm. Same thing, right? It's not a particularly great access point. It's not a particularly powerful router. It's not a terribly great switch, and it's not a terribly great cable modem. Actually, the cable modem's pretty okay. Inside of all of those devices, though, there's almost always a device or a configuration setting known as bridge mode. And what bridge mode does is it disables all of the routing and firewall functionality, and it's probably going to give you a bazillion scary messages. Oh, don't do this. Your internet will break. Your network. Just ignore it. Keep clicking through and enable bridge mode, and that will turn all of the ports on the back of the router, switch, modem, access point combo into just a switch connected to a modem. And what you're able to do at that point then is plug that into your PFSense box and manage it through PFSense. We do it all the time. Those combination devices are becoming more and more ubiquitous, and they're all over the place. So that's what I would do. But you certainly don't need to give up. And if that, on the off chance it doesn't have a bridge mode, and I've yet to see one that doesn't in the last 5 years, but on the off chance it doesn't, ask your cable provider what modems they support. They're probably going to give you, they're going to say one of two things. Either here's the list of MAC addresses we will authorize on our network, and so here are the brands you have to buy, or they'll say, we support any DOCSIS 3 modem. And then you can just go buy a DOCSIS 3 modem, and you're back in the game.
I see. So would that affect the cable part of, like, aspect of that? Because the thing is,
no.
So this box gives off, okay, because there's other boxes that wirelessly are connected to this. I want to make sure it doesn't affect any cable. Like any like, watching TV, I don't want that to affect that any type of way.
Well, the cable TV itself is going to, the telcos they provide a number of different services through a single wire, right? And so when that wire comes into your house, sometimes they'll have a VoIP modem in there. It's known as an ATA, and essentially what it does is it takes a VoIP line and turns it into a traditional analog line, and so you'll see cable providers do that. But the cable modem goes to a CMTS, or a cable modem termination system. That's what's on the other end of your cable modem, and that's essentially just a very long network run. And so typically what cable providers do, if they're providing more than one service, if they're an integrated service provider, they will have cable TV, phone, and internet all coming in through a single wire. But there are the cable modem itself talks to the CMTS, so that's one link. And then you've got the cable the cable devices which tune your cable TV, and those talk to a separate device. They don't talk to the CMTS on the other side. And then you have the phone system, which is talking essentially to a SIP server, and then the ATA converts SIP to analog and all that other junk. But the point is that if you swap out the router or make any configuration changes on the router or the switch, unless you have, there are some companies that are doing things like IPTV. In those circumstances, I could see how it might break something. However, it's going to, if it's communicating wirelessly, undoubtedly it's going through your access point, and so you'll be able to set your new network up with the new network ID. In fact, I have a friend that owns a wireless ISP, and that's what they do. All of their TVs have little boxes. They connect Wi-Fi back to the thing, and it brings TV in over the internet, and that's kind of how they do it. So if it's a smaller ISP, they'll do that. But any large ISP is running coax in, or actually these days they're running fibers to a micronode that sits outside the house, and then the micronode, the last like 25 feet or whatever, is a copper run into the cable modem.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help you?
Yeah. Okay. One very small question, and that's where I'm done. So now, for the live TV shows, live radio shows, I guess I'm listening to this. Is that only through your website? I'm assuming I can't listen to that live through Apple Podcasts, or can I?
I don't know. I tell you what. Here's the thing. I am never opposed to a new way for people to listen to consume content. So I will look into it and see if there is another way to do it. The only ways at the moment to listen to the show, of course, you can do it at AskNoahShow.com. The other thing you can do is you can go over to KEQQRadio.com and it's streamed there, of course, when we're live. The other thing you can do is, because KEQQ Radio is an affiliate radio station, we are on TuneIn. So you can download the TuneIn app and you can pull up KEQQ and listen to the Ask Noah Show on the TuneIn app, or you can tell your Amazon Lady in a Tube to play KEQQ, and she'll pull up if you're again live, you'll be able to listen to the show there. So we have a bunch of different ways for you to get to the show.
I see.
But I will look and see if there is a way to do it live over iTunes or Google Play or any of those things. I will look into it, and we will have it up as soon as possible.
Okay, sounds good. Take care, and I love the great work that you do.
Hey, I really appreciate the call. Thanks for joining us tonight. 855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624. The email live at AskNoahShow.com. If you haven't heard, there is a new show on the Destination Linux network. It's called DLNXtend, and the whole idea behind the show is to bring people who follow the shows, who listen to the shows, who engage with the shows, and bring them on to talk about what they disagree with myself and the other DLN hosts on. And so one of those people is CubicalNate, and he joins us every week on Sundays for Destination Linux. If you're not joining us, then you're missing out. So you want to check out that show on Sundays, and CubicalNate joins us on the Ask Noah Show tonight to discuss a couple of things. Welcome into the program, sir. Paging CubicalNate. I see him there. Now I don't see him there. All right, we'll come back to CubicalNate. 855-450-NOAH. It's 855-450-6624. The email live at AskNoahShow.com. So Unifi had a blunder this week. This was ridiculous. So Unifi updated their firmware, and they updated the firmware to basically spy on people. They changed their network behavior so that all of these devices that are adopted in the latest firmware call home, and they send a number of different pieces of information back to Unifi. Now, you might remember this is the second time in a year that Unifi has irked me off. And the first time was with Unifi Protect, and they limited the number of cameras that you could use because they weren't going to let you run the Unifi software on proper enterprise hardware. And they said, well, we built this new thing and it's really good. Of course, it didn't have redundant power supplies, it didn't have redundant network interfaces, it didn't have IPMI, it didn't have ZFS storage pools. But other than that, it was a pretty cool device. And so I was upset, and a couple other people were upset, and Unifi's answer was basically, hey, we still have the old cameras. If you'd like to use those, we're going to continue to support them. And I have continued to use those cameras, and we've continued to spin that controller up on on our own servers and use it that way. And the thing that is super frustrating to me was after that blunder, Unifi didn't get the message at how fast people seem to notice strange things that occur on their network. It's almost like these people are the kind of people that are tech enthusiasts, network engineers, maybe do this for a career and kind of pay attention to those kinds of things. I don't know. But this is the second time they screwed this up. They included this phone home feature in all of their devices in their new firmware. Now, Ubiquiti told customers that all of the information is being handled, and I use my air finger quotes here, securely, and has been cleared to comply with GDPR, Europe's data privacy rules. Okay, so let's stop right there. First of all, there is no such thing as anonymous data. There is no such thing as anonymous data. One more time for those of you in the back, there's no such thing as anonymous data. Data by definition is a collection of identifiable information. If it wasn't identifiable as unique, it's not useful. It's not useful for us being able to do analytics. It may be less identifiable than a full name, social security number, address, all of that stuff, but it's not truly anonymous. Now, this quote-unquote feature transmits all of the device metrics, and Unifi refused to answer. I've been to 3 different forums entirely, not just forum posts, but forums, trying to get an answer from Unifi on exactly what is being transmitted. They won't answer it. So the internet has done some sleuthing, and here's what they came up with. It transmits the time and date of all connected devices, the first 8 of the MAC address, and the transfer data amount and speed. Now, all devices with current firmware are going to do this. So, I and a bunch of other people who use Unifi who found this to be profoundly infuriating said, fine, then all of those Unifi devices, all of your little spy devices are going to go into a management VLAN that don't have any access to the internet, and we'll just pass the traffic from the clients that are connected. Let's say that the access point might have an address of 10.10.10.1, and the 10 network goes nowhere, but the access point is connected to a network, maybe like, let's say 172.16.0.0, and that network has access to the internet. So any clients connecting to an access point will be able to go out to the internet, but the access point itself can't talk out to the internet. Well, that seemed like a great solution until it came to light that there's a couple different problems. First of all, if you block the access points and you still have the Unified Security Gateway, the USG is kind enough to go, oh, you can't send all your data back home? No problem, buddy. I'll go ahead and collect it and forward it on. So the USG forwards all the data on, and of course you can't stop the USG from forwarding data on, because if you block the USG from accessing the internet, you've taken your network offline. The other problem is if you actually go about the process of dropping network data from if you go about the process of blocking internet access from the access points and other subsequent devices, there is a memory leak. And what the memory leak does is it will continue to retry every 25 seconds, and it just keeps eating up memory and failure until the device just decides to go into degraded performance, and then it will reboot itself. Well, that's not really helpful either. And Unifi they have totally screwed this up in every possible way. So Unifi, they've been unclear on exactly what information is being transmitted. So there's screw up number 1. Screw up number 2 is they didn't post a note in the change log about this stupid feature that they're calling a feature, I'm calling spyware. Third of all, they made it mandatory. There's no opt-out option. There's no turn it off, and it should be an opt-in. Hey, do you want to send a bunch of private network data to Unifi for the purpose of quote-unquote troubleshooting? That should be an option that we have. It's not. And then they went back and deleted their post on their bulletin board system. And that was the moment where I went, okay, this is not an unintentional mistake. This is not an accident. They're intentionally doing this. They are trying to get after people. And so they released a statement and they said, we have started to gather crashes and other critical events strictly for the purpose of improving our products. Any data collected is completely anonymized, GDPR compliant, transmitted using end-to-end encryption, and encrypted at rest. There is no on-off switch, but there's also no penalties for blocking internet access to the device, dropping traffic to this host, and or blocking it via DNS. Okay, so first of all, there are some downsides, although I'll get to it in a second. They have fixed that in a later firmware update about the memory leak. Second of all, as far as the data being encrypted end-to-end, if it truly is anonymized, why wouldn't they just publish this stuff? In fact, why can't I see the crash reports on the device that I purchased on my own network? Why does Unifi get those reports and I can't even look at them? So if it really is anonymized, publish the stuff. Just put it out on the internet, right? It's anonymized. There's no customer data to leak, right? This is a problem. This is how you know there's something there. The fact that they say, oh, it's anonymized, and then they say, well, but it's encrypted, and the whole thing just drives me nuts. And so after a massive blowback by the community, they responded and said, if there are any questions related to this, I may suggest taking a look at our EULA, our Terms of Service and Privacy Policy, which are readily available on our website. So the TLDR is, screw you, we can do it via our EULA, and you agreed to that. And then he goes on to say, and this is an important part, he says, the memory leak that you referenced was a bug specific to 4.0.6, which was fixed as of 4.0.61. Hope this helps clarify. Cheers, Mike. And so they have since published yet another firmware update, and in the latest one now, as of today, there is an option to disable this feature, but you have to do it from the CLI, and you have to go edit a config file. And they say that it's going to come to the graphic interface at a later time. So this is strike two, Unifi. Screw up again, and we're going to have words. I did some basic looking. I spent a couple of hours this week trying to look at what else is out there, and here's kind of what I came down with is, yes, this is crappy. Yes, this is terrible, but do you have any guarantees that, like, devices that phone home are so prevalent? Do you have any guarantees that any other company isn't working on it? The fact that there are all of these tech enthusiasts that are using these devices, the fact that they are so involved on the forums just kind of tends to bring issues to light faster and more viciously. I'm not necessarily convinced that Unifi is doing anything that Ruckus isn't doing. I looked at some of their competitors, and all of them make references to cloud-connected data analytics. There's all sorts of references to things that happen on the cloud and outside of the network. So I don't know that Unifi is specific to this, and they did roll it back pretty fast after they saw the uplash or the backlash. But come on, guys. You cannot be sending information out of people's private networks onto the internet, onto your servers without their consent. Not cool, Unifi. Not cool. All right, let's try this again. CubicalNate, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me this time?
I can. Welcome into the program, sir.
Oh, man, thank you. I love this program.
Yeah.
I'm so glad I'm here.
Me too. I'm glad that you're taking the time to be here. So you and I, we want to have a conversation about Microsoft. And you being a former Windows hater, you have some interesting perspectives that maybe I don't have. And so we thought we'd bring you on the show and we'd chat about them. So I guess kind of give me the rundown. What are you experiencing as it relates to Windows and Microsoft's love for Linux?
Well, now, I'm going to say I still am not a Windows lover. I don't heart Windows, just to be clear. Okay. I find it a frustrating user experience. However, I will say that I'm kind of ramping up my my programming, like learning programming and whatnot. And so I installed VS Code or Visual Studio Code and in my OpenSUSE Tumbleweed machine. And Microsoft made it so easy to keep updated. They have all the commands right there for this is what you need to do to add the repo and everything else. And I was pretty impressed by that. I know I'm a little bit, I feel like I've lost a little respect for myself because I do see a Microsoft repository in my Linux machine. I do realize that does seem kind of, there's a part of me that does hurt a little bit. However, looking at this Microsoft is a big ship and they're steering it in a different direction, it seems like, and that takes a while. And I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt right now. I'm cautiously optimistic, let's say.
But things are working well. Things are working well. So I guess just give this to me. If somebody was going into software development today, point blank, CubicalNate, are the software tools that Microsoft is making that run on Linux, are they good tools?
Yeah. Yes,
are they better than are they better?
Absolutely.
Are they better, or do they offer any advantages that native tools on Linux didn't have before? Are they adding a net positive? Are they having a net positive influence on the Linux ecosystem?
Now, I'm going to have to say this from my limited experience. So I work with other people at my employer and that are running Linux in the workplace, working on Linux machines. In fact, you can find a Pop! OS or an Ubuntu machine, and you'll find my OpenSUSE machine. And to kind of keep us all on the same sheet of music, as it were. They're all running Visual Studio Code because it integrates so well into the other systems that this corporation has. So, would the open source alternatives work just as well? I really don't know. I can't say for sure, but what I can say is it's making coding for these, appliances of the future, let's call it, a lot easier for everyone to be on the same.
Talk to me about some of the additional situations of open source products that Microsoft has kind of involved themselves in.
So does that make any sense?
I'm sorry. Did we have a communication failure there? What was the last thing you said?
I think so. I think we did. In the to keep everybody kind of on the same sheet of music, they are everyone runs Visual Studio Code, whether they're Windows on the Windows machines or on the Linux machines. So everyone can use the same set of tools, regardless of whatever their platform is that they're working on. So it's making for a lot easier time developing these new appliances of the future, as it were.
Now, excuse my ignorance, when it comes to Visual Studio Code, are these things is it a tool that can only be used to develop Windows software, or are you able to develop Linux software using Visual Studio Code?
I can develop whatever software I want.
Really? So this is, this is a tool that is useful for Linux. Now tell me about this. What do you think of additional situations of open source products? Talk to me about
something like the Edge browser.
Yeah, Edge browser, PowerShell, Windows Calculator, Windows Live Writer, all those things.
Now, I don't use those really. The .NET Core libraries. I'm going to say that probably makes for a lot easier time of getting more software to run natively in Linux. I mean, wouldn't you agree to that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think that's a net positive for us.
How does this relate to getting people on the Linux desktop? This seems highly advantageous if you're already a Linux user and you get hired by a place that wants to use this given tool set. Now that tool set is available to you. Do you think there's anybody out there that's going to say, okay, Linux is a better development machine than Microsoft Windows is now that these tools are available here? So people might actually start coming from a working Windows development environment over to Linux land. Do you see that happening?
Now, I can only speak again from my own personal view of the world from where I work.
Sure.
But 3-4 years ago, there weren't any Linux machines in the advanced design area or advanced development area. It was all Windows machines. Now you're seeing Linux machines pop up. Now you're seeing, no, this is the right tool for the job here is this machine, so we can do the machine learning necessary to do all these whiz-bang products.
Mm-hmm.
So really Linux is becoming the tool to use, not just a tool to use.
In your experience, have you seen people that were Linux users first, and then they are, let's say, developer seconds? Like, are they people that were using Linux at home, and then they said, oh, now I can finally bring my Linux box into work, or I can finally flash my work box with Linux? Or is it more you've got people now that are looking over at their colleagues and friends that are using Linux and going, hey, maybe I should install that and give that a shot? Do you have any insight into that?
I think what it is a lot of these people are, they're nerds like me, and they're technologists. They like the technology. They like to play, and I think they're just finding it as the better tool. Some of them I've learned it in college. Some of them, are. There's a guy that he used to take care of all the lab functions, and he built a lot of the stuff on Raspberry Pis amazingly Raspberry Pis actually for commercial and almost industrial data acquisition systems.
Mm-hmm.
But because it just did it better than the Windows alternatives. They just replaced it like, well, this will just work better, it'll be cheaper, and we can do this, and it'll work for now until we find a better solution. And I think that's just kind of how they're looking at it. What is the most economical solution to get us from point A to point B? And right now in the manufacturing, industrial, the engineering spaces, Linux is kind of moving in there little bit by bit. And to circle back, Microsoft is in a way having a hand in it. which is rather ironic.
That's so awesome. I'm so happy to hear that. It's nice to hear firsthand knowledge from people out in the field that are seeing some of this stuff and going, hey, you know what? You guys can sit behind a microphone and talk all day long about whether Microsoft is doing a good thing or a bad thing, but what I'm seeing down here at ground zero is that it's a net positive to people on the Linux desktop. So I thank you for that, and I thank you for bringing it to the attention of both myself and everybody who listens to the show. Tell me about DLNXtend. We haven't had a chance really to talk about it on this program. That's your new show. Talk to me about it.
Well, myself, who's been a long-time fan of you, I followed you around for quite a while, and Destination Linux for a few years now. We just kind of hung out and just kind of kept hanging out and interacting with you guys. And myself and Eric Adams, we're both nerds that love Linux, and we got essentially approached by Mr. Michael Tennell, who said, "Hey, are you interested in doing something with us?" And we said, "Yeah." Said we often don't agree with you on things, and it'd be nice to basically have a rebuttal.
Well, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, so we're kind of trying to be like another voice, because frankly, you're very entrenched in your ways, and Michael and his. Although I often say Michael's never wrong, but I know that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ryan Dasgeek, he has other views, and as far as especially about security and certain things like that and hardware. And so for me and Eric, we're a little more on the pragmatist side of things. Like, how do we at our levels, myself being in engineering and Eric being in the information systems, web services type space, how do we view security, and how do we implement those same or similar security practices or whatever. And so we don't necessarily always agree, with maybe your way might be better, but I don't know that I can implement your way, or I don't know that I agree with how you do it.
Sure.
Basically.
Sure.
That's just an example.
No, there's
it's fun to basically talk to Eric and about you guys.
There's always more than one way to skin a cat, right? There's always more than one way to crack a nut, and there's rarely one way that is drastically superior than the other, right? We're all smart people. We all have different ways of going about doing things, and I think what's interesting is, as a host of a show, I find it to be incredibly enlightening and challenging that there are people out there that are going to challenge what we say and are going to think with it critically, do it in a respectful manner, in a constructive manner, but challenge things nonetheless. And I love that. And I love the concept of DLNXtend. I love the raw nature of DLNXtend. And I love the fact that the Destination Linux Network is so open to the community and functions very much, if you think about it, like an open source project, right? There is no gatekeeper with Destination Linux Network. It's, the most active, best voices rise to the top, and those are the people that are heard. And there is no barrier to entry. There is no gatekeeper. I like that. I like that model. I like that approach. I think if we really believe in what we preach about open source software, then we should be willing to apply that model to open source media. And so that's what's being done. And I'm excited to be a part of that. And I'm glad that you are willing to take the time and to do that as well.
And I think the other good part about it is often you'll find on the World Wide Web, when people have dissenting opinions, it's usually not in a very respectful way.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally do not care for that at all. So
right.
I and Eric and myself, we would like to set the example of what it's like to have with a dissenting opinion in a respectful way.
Right.
This is how this is another way to look at it. The classical model of discussing ideas is kind of what we're doing.
Perfect example of that is right in the chat room. Your boss, Das Geek, says as long as you continue to agree with him, the show is going to continue. That's a very respectful way to point out that he's going to just take your voice away if you don't agree with everything he says. That's a nice, respectful, gentle thing to say. I think that kind of
exactly.
I think we should foster that.
Yeah, exactly. I do appreciate that. Ryan is. I would never call him a bulldog, right?
Yeah. No, of course not. He's the kindest soul. I mean, here's the thing. You have to understand, right? He's right. So there's that. But if people want to catch DLNXtend, how can they get to the show? CubicalNate?
Well, sorry, wrong button again. I don't even know my own computer. Well, it's DLNXtend.com. You can get it there. If and all the avenues like Google Play, iTunes, and there's actually an entire list of things I've never heard of that that Michael knows and has put the podcast feeds into. Pretty much anywhere your podcasts are, you can find it. And if you can't find it, send Michael a message because he didn't do it right. That's what I'll
And
tell
we
you.
love to pick on Michael any opportunity that we get because he's kind of our favorite. He's our favorite, I don't know, dog to kick in the corner or something like that. Any of the Destination Linux Network or Destination Linux Network shows can be found at destinationlinux.network. And so if you head over there, all of the resources, including all of the community resources, and I mean, there are a ton: Telegram, Mumble, Steam, Discord, Discourse. I mean, you name it, it's there. Head over to destinationlinux.network and you can check all of those out, as well as if you just click on the show's link, guess what's right there? DLNXtend. And they got some news, tons of cool stuff. And you guys are doing this show weekly, is that right?
Correct. We do it weekly. We try and record it by the end of the week after all the other shows have been published. And then Eric and I will talk about it. We'll put some notes together, and then we'll just start chatting pretty much, and then cut it up and spit it out pretty much.
That's awesome. Thanks for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate it. We'll get you back on the program soon.
Thank you very much.
That is CubicalNate. He joins us this hour on the Ask Noah show, and we'll have him back to continue to discuss and question my perfect views on everything. Of course, if you want more information, there's always a ton of stories that we just don't get to. We just don't have the time to dig through all the stuff that I'd want to cover in a given week. And all of those are available to you on the podcast site. You can go to podcast.asknoahshow.com. There you'll find all of the articles and references that I use to compose the show, as well as anything that comes about while I'm doing the show, and as well as all the stuff that we didn't have time to get to after the show. If you want more content, I invite you to go over to asknoahshow.com. There you'll find links to all sorts of other resources, such as our YouTube channel, Mindrip Media. There's tutorials, there's reviews, all sorts of stuff, so make sure to check that out. And don't forget to check out Linux Delta, our distro review site. More information and more tools and features are coming to that as well. The Ask Noah Show continues next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central, asknoahshow.com. We'll see you next week.